Hello, everyone. In previous lessons, we have talked about functions, but rather indirectly. On the screen, we see an application that prints a message to the screen asking the user to sign a guest book. We then take a variable name and ask the user to input their name through the input function, first displaying sign here, and then we print their name to the screen. All of these use functions in Python. Functions in Python allow you to reuse code over and over again that you would normally have to rewrite. It allows for cleaner code and cleaner definitions of your applications. So for instance, if we run this application, we're only doing this once. We're asked to sign the guest book. We'll type in a name, hit enter, and we are welcomed into the guest book. If we go back to our code, let's say we want to do this multiple times. Well, without functions, we would have to repeat this over and over and over again. So if we save this application, run it again, we're asked to sign the guest book, or welcomed, we sign it again, the next person signs the guest book, and so on and so forth. But as you can see, it gets a bit untenable in your code to keep having to repeat code statements that could be reused through a function. So if you remember from your previous courses in 1050 and your introduction to programming and programming logic, functions in Java and C# and C++ were defined much like code blocks in flow control, so if statements and while and for loops, where you would put the body of code that you wanted to reuse within a code block, and you would define the function name and any parameters. We can do the same in Python. So for instance, if we wanted to create a function that would ask the user to sign the guest book, we could simply define a function to do so. In Python, you begin a function by using the word def, or def. You put a space, and you type in the name of the function that you would like to use. So here we'll call it sign guest book. We'll go over function parameters in a minute, so for now just open and close parentheses after the name that you are defining for your function and put a colon. And just as in flow control statements, you can go to the next line and insert an indented code block. We'll take our code from now line 6 and 7, where we ask the user for their name and display it to the screen, and we will move that over to our function. Remember, if you've cut and pasted that code, if you're doing this yourself, to indent it to signify that it is a code block. And now, instead of asking the user over and over again to sign the guest book through those two lines, we can simply call the function sign guest book with an open and close parenthesis. If we save our application, go back to the command prompt and run it, we're asked to sign the guest book, and our name is displayed. If we wanted to keep doing this, we could use the function within a loop structure. So if we wanted unlimited users to sign our guest book, we could create a while loop. We don't know, maybe there'll be a lot of guests, so we'll just do while true and put the function in the code block inside of the flow control while statement. Save this, run it again, and we are repeatedly asked to sign in to our guest book. So I will cancel out using a keyboard interrupt, Control C, since we did have a while loop that ran on forever, and I'm going to clear my command prompt. So just like in other languages that you might have learned, Python also accepts parameters into functions where you can pass arguments into those parameters. So for instance, maybe we want to break up our sign guestbook function into two functions, one which asks the user for a name and another which displays the name to the screen. And in that second function, we want to pass the name for display. What we can do is create another function. Maybe we call it display name. and it accepts a string input parameter of a name. Now again, just like variable declarations in Python, input parameters do not need their type declared. So you can go ahead and just type the name of the parameter, and Python will dynamically determine the type based on the argument passed into the parameter. Now we can just take the code from our signed guestbook method or function, and we'll paste that into display name to display the name. And in signed guestbook now we have to call the display name function. And we take name, which was input from the user, and pass it to display name. Now, this might be a bit confusing because the parameter name was the same name as the variable name. It doesn't have to be like that. It just so happened that it was here. So if I go and rename this variable within signed guestbook, name input, it may help clarify the parameter name versus the argument being passed into it. When we talk in our next lesson about local and global scoping, you have to be concerned with how you name variables and your intention in naming variables with respect to variables defined at the script level versus variables defined at the function level. So just for now, I will provide some clarity by renaming it. So if I save this and run it again in our command prompt, we're asked to sign the name and do it again. And it performs the same functions it did before, but instead of reusing code and cutting it and pasting it over and over again, we've used multiple functions, some with parameters, some without, to perform the same functionality without having to unnecessarily retype code over and over. Now, one comment in Python, you need to make sure that you are defining your functions before you use them. Now, we're not going to get into building your own modules or init or main or classes just yet. But for now, when you are building linear scripts in Python, you need to make sure that any function you are using is defined before you use it. So for instance, if we were to have defined signed guestbook later on in the code after we use signed guestbook within the while flow control loop, Python would have raised an error because that name was not defined yet. So just make sure any function you're creating is defined before you use it, or you will get an error raised by Python.